Talk about growing great lettuce. Now I'm trying to get to that. I think I'm going to have to stop sharing so that I can press this button. There we go. All right. I think we're on the right slide now. So this is the agenda for this evening's talk. We're going to discuss an overview of the family, the plant family, which lettuce belongs to. We'll talk about plant selection, actually planting, and your site selection, where you're going to put the lettuce in your garden, watering your lettuce, mulching your lettuce, fertilizing the plant, some pest management, and then share some resources. And I'll take some questions at the end. And of course, I'll stop periodically throughout the presentation so that you can ask a question. And if you have a burning question about any of the topics that we're discussing, just go ahead and ask it. If I can answer it, I will do my best to do so. Lettuce belongs to the Asteraceae family, and we can have a little bit of a discussion about the pronunciation of these family names. Plant families generally end in EAE. When you see that word, that's how you know you're talking about a plant family. The Asteraceae family is the daisy family. It is one of the largest plant families, if not the largest plant family that's been created. Sorry, a little bit of a dry throat. I have heard this family name also pronounced Asteraceae and Asteraceae. And it's come to my attention that all three are prevalent in the industry. So I'm of a mind that you pick the one that you're comfortable pronouncing. I'm going to go with Asteraceae. That makes sense to me. The genus for the lettuce is the Lactuca, and then there's the L. The L by the genus name generally indicates that it was something designated by Carolus Linnaeus when he started his system of categorizing and indexing. There are between 23,000 and 30,000 species of lettuce within the Asteraceae family and the genus Lactuca. That's really big. It's in the family with things that you're probably very familiar with, like daisies, marigolds, sunflowers, chrysanthemums, and zinnias. Now, the Asteraceae family vegetables include chicory, cardoon, that was a new one to me, and Jerusalem and globe artichoke. Most of us are familiar with that. Turns out that cardoon is also called the artichoke thistle. It's a Mediterranean plant found in the wild along the coasts of that particular sea. You can actually eat the stalk, so that's pretty interesting. Lots of variety in this plant family. When we take a look at the idea of lettuce through the years, I love this. I love this artwork. It's so fun. Lettuce is considered an old world food coming from um, the European continents. It's been grown throughout the world, cultivated for centuries. It's been called the world's most popular salad plant. And if you want to know more about the etymology of the name, there's some details here. I particularly like the idea that the word lettuce is probably derived from the Old French laituse, meaning milky, referring to the plant. I find that really interesting. This perhaps is my favorite artwork concerning veggies. Love this one. So Giuseppe Arcimboldo painted this. It is a representation of, now let me see if I can get this right. It's actually the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, painted in the guise of a Roman god. That's who Vertumnus is, supposedly, by the use of vegetables. If I'm getting this right, all of the vegetables here, the colors, even the attitude, are symbolic to show power and might and fertility and uh, the ability to rule. Who thought lettuce could be politically powerful? There's another one, the autumn beard. I love these. I think they're so fun. Lettuce is high art. Okay, now this slide, there's a lot of small detail. I'm just going to take a minute. I'm just going to sit here quietly for just a minute so you can take a look at all of the information on this slide. So this is a list of several species of lettuce: Canada lettuce, woodland lettuce, grass leaf lettuce, hairy lettuce, biannual lettuce, garden lettuce, prickly lettuce, and some of their varieties. There's lots of lettuce out there to choose from should you get interested in growing lettuce in your garden. There are things to consider when you're choosing your lettuce. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the difference between an heirloom lettuce seed and a hybrid lettuce seed. And it's true that this generally only matters when you're trying to save the seed, and I'll explain why. Because an heirloom seed is generally an open pollinated seed that will produce an offspring that is true to form, which means the offspring plant that grows from the seed of your parent plant will have all the characteristics of the parent plant. It will generally have the same growth habit. It will have the same, pretty much the same water requirements. It will grow to the same density. It will grow to the same height. It will be close to the same color, and it will have close to the same flavor. So heirloom varieties are going to produce true to type. Hybrid varieties, however, are different because a hybrid is a cross between two parent plants, and the offspring of a hybrid cross doesn't always create a plant that is true to type. It may have some of the characteristics of the parent plant, but not all of the characteristics of the parent plant. Unless you're very carefully working with a propagation program where you're trying to germinate specific seeds that have specific characteristics from your plant, it's really the luck of the draw. You don't know what you're going to get in your baby lettuce. So that's why understanding which variety of lettuce is an heirloom and which variety of a lettuce is a hybrid is going to become important. Only if you're going to grow the lettuce all the way to seed and then save the seed and plant it. It is true that hybrid lettuce seeds generally are grown for a little more disease resistance. They may be a little more hardy than an heirloom lettuce. That's something to consider. And most of this information is on the seed package. So you don't have to take the name of the lettuce that you buy and look it up online and do a lot of research. A lot of this information is going to be provided on the package for you. Lettuce can be used not only as an edible, but for landscaping. And we've started to see this now in commercial properties and some entertainment venues where there's a kind of lettuce there that's it's been grown for color, a particular sort of a purple or something. When you're looking for what kind of lettuce you want to plant, the general rule of thumb is plant what you like to eat. If you already like eating it, it'll probably be fun to grow and you'll enjoy the work that you're going to need to do to raise up to maturity that lettuce. There are also things to consider like the flavor. Is it a little bitter? Is it sweeter? Does it have a more robust flavor? What about that leaf texture and thickness? Lettuces that tend to carry a little more water in their leaf tissue may not have as strong a flavor. They might have a softer texture. How long does it take your lettuce to grow? Is that lettuce variety that you're growing particularly disease resistant or not? Now, you may not know a lot about this unless you actually look it up. There may be minimal information on the seed package about this, or you may gain a lot more information as you're growing your lettuce. I know I really have. Does your lettuce have some kind of a heat tolerance, or does it tolerate some shade? Any questions about plant selection?
So far, excuse me, so far I don't see anything in the chat, but feel free to type in your questions or unmute yourself as we go along or now.
Thanks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but it's kind of a cute question. Just because it's a leafy green doesn't actually mean it's a lettuce, right? It could be something else. It could be a cabbage or a mustard, which is part of the Brassicaceae family. It could be a spinach, the Amaranthaceae family. There are other greens besides a full mature lettuce, maybe a microgreen or a radish top or a collard, right? There are also edible weeds that you can go foraging for. I would strongly recommend a lot of guidance there. Excuse me, if you're going to forage for your greens. But the idea here is that just because it's green doesn't make it a lettuce. It could be something else. Let's talk about planting and site selection. Okay, site selection. Lettuce is green. That gives you a hint already. At least the green lettuces, lots of chlorophyll in those leaves. It's going to require some sunlight. Even though lettuce are considered a cool weather plant, you're still looking at 4 to 6 hours of sunlight per day to get the maturity in the plant that you want so that you really get something that you want to eat. So planting it in a particularly shady spot in your garden, probably not a good idea. Rotating lettuce in the garden, if you've had lettuce in one spot in your garden last year, maybe you want to put it someplace else this year because you want to avoid crop specific pests and diseases getting into the soil and eventually retarding the maturity of your lettuce. That would be a bummer after all the work that you're going to put in. You really don't want to put your lettuce in where it's going to have competition with super deep rooted weeds or really any other plant that's deep rooted and well established. You don't want your poor lettuce to have to compete with that. You want the lettuce to be able to pull all the nutrients that it needs out of the soil. Lettuces generally do well in a variety of soils, but like well draining soil. They don't particularly enjoy super wet feet. So you want that water to be able to drain through. Now, lettuce is cool in this regard. It's a leafy vegetable, right? So all of those leaves will often attract critters. I know I have a problem with my lettuce and round little roly-polies or mealybugs or centipedes, that kind of thing seem to get down into the bottom of the lettuce in the crown where the plant meets the soil. It's kind of a problem sometimes. Or I have grasshoppers in my garden. And if I plant a lettuce or a kale or a spinach, the grasshoppers figure it's a buffet for them and they all decide to eat my plants, which means I'm not eating my plants. So there are really a couple of ways that I deal with that. And one of them is I plant more than I think I'm going to need. The other one is that lettuce can actually have protection put over the top of it because you don't need a pollinator to get to the lettuce for crop production. So you can actually cover your lettuce with a cloche or an Agribond or a nursery fabric or a variety of things to keep, say, the grasshoppers from landing on your lettuce or the beetles if they're going to land on your lettuce and start to eat it. I think that's pretty cool, actually. It's one of the things I like about lettuce. And when you're planting your lettuce, because lettuce is not a root vegetable and it's not particularly sensitive, you can plant seeds right in the soil where you're going to grow them, or you can start your seeds indoors or someplace else until they're nice and strong, and then transplant the lettuce into your garden, which I think is a huge plus. You want to make sure that you're adding organic matter, could be compost to your soil before you put the lettuce in. You want to mix that in really well. You want to make sure that it's well composted organic matter so that it's not so hot that it's going to burn those sensitive little plantlings that you're trying to get growing in your soil. You can add fertilizer if you're not adding it beforehand. You can add a little bit of it when you're planting. Again, you want to make sure you're mixing all that in, but you don't want a lot of soil salinity because lettuce does not like that. And again, we're talking about well-draining soils, and that will help the fertilizer make its way where it needs to be. It will help to get rid of the salts that are going to accumulate in the soil. Well-draining soil just sort of washes all of that out. And as I said before, you can start your seeds indoors. You can start them in greenhouses. The seed package that you choose will probably have fairly specific directions for how to plant your lettuce, how deep, how far apart, those kinds of things. But here's a general rule that you plant your seed twice as deep as the size of the seed. So with lettuce, you can actually put it on the surface of the soil, sprinkle it on the top, sprinkle a little soil over that, and very gently rake it in. Your seed spacing here is suggested. Now, some lettuce seeds can be really small. Let's talk about those planting techniques. Our time to plant, remember, lettuce is a cool weather crop, so approximately October to March. If you're putting in those transplants, you're planting them at soil depth. You're not plunging them in so that the stems and the leaves that you've worked so hard to grow are beneath the soil. Lettuce tends to be shallow rooted. So if you don't have a really deep vegetable bed, or if you're needing to plant them in pots or in a more shallow container, this is your plant. Just make sure that you're avoiding overhead watering. That's going to leave a lot of moisture on the leaves. Your young plants, when they're very tiny and you're transplanting them from the indoors out or from your greenhouse to the garden, since they've been in a relatively sheltered spot, you might need to give them a little bit of shade when you're getting them out in the sunshine. It's like hardening off plants that you've up potted for the season and you're moving them. They might not like going right from dappled shade to direct sun. So just watch the plants and see how it's going. Now, if your soil is really heavy, clay, mine is here in Chino Hills. If it's really heavy clay, you can always amend it. If you're planting your lettuce in pots or containers, then the potting mix that you have is completely and totally up to you, what you're putting in that container. With lettuce, it's a good idea also that you maybe succession plant. So start some seeds and a week or two later, start some more seeds so that you have a series of lettuce to be able to harvest throughout the season. In general, we're talking 70 to 90 days for head lettuce and 40 to 50 days for leaf lettuce, approximately. Okay, this is a little bit of a summary of the things that we've talked about, but it includes a little bit more information for those of you who live in mountain areas or in the desert. If you're up in the mountains, you could be growing lettuce year round, depending on what your particular climate is in your area. In the desert, October to March. Do we have any questions? Or are we okay?
Yeah, I don't see anything. Just comment, noting your comment about twice as deep as the width of the seed. Yep. So far nothing. You're good to go.
Okay. All right. So watering options. As with a lot of edibles, consistency of watering really is the key. I know that a lot of us are in cities that have quite restrictive guidelines now for how often we're able to water our plants and what we're able to do. From what I understand, vegetables can be an exception to that rule as you're growing food to feed yourself. But whatever watering regimen schedule you decide on, make sure that it's as consistent as possible. Young plants do need to be well watered so they can establish. You want to check the soil before you're watering because you don't want it to be overwatered. You don't want it to get claggy or soggy. Lettuce is shallow rooting, so it will do well in a shallow bed, but that doesn't mean that you need shallow water. What you want to do is get enough water in the plant, give it a nice deep soak every so often, so that the roots will dive down and grow deeply and establish in the soil to go after that water. And again, avoid getting water on the foliage. So that means that rather than an overhead sprinkler or a rotator, drip irrigation is a good idea around your lettuce. It's efficient. You could also use troughs or furrows or donuts. You can see an image of that here. That's one option. I have a girlfriend who uses an Oya, which is a suggestion here at the end. Loves it. So because lettuces are thirsty plants, she uses a larger one. It's wider. It's about as wide as a 1 gallon nursery pot. So more than say a 2 liter plastic bottle that you overturn and cut off and use. You want to make sure that wherever that you're putting it, you're paying attention to the situation in which you are placing your plant. Okay, so here's just a reminder of how to take a look and check that you're giving your plants enough water and some of your options for providing them with water. Mulching, one of my favorite topics. As we know, lettuces, Brassicaceae family tend to get a little bit buggy and they tend to get a little bit weedy if you're not careful. So mulch is a great way to keep those weeds down. It also keeps moisture in the soil, insulates from heat. When it decomposes, it will actually amend the soil depending on the kind of mulch that you're using. It's good for a lot of reasons. And you can also use it in raised beds, and you can use it in pots and containers. You want to think about what kind of a fertilizer you're going to use as you're mulching. Because if you're going to bother to apply fertilizer to your plants, you really want to be able to get it where it's going to do the most good and not having sitting on top of the mulch. So if you're adding a nice thick layer of mulch, maybe you want to go with a liquid fertilizer rather than a granular. I'm not going to tell you which sort you should use. I'm just saying that you need to think about the situation in which you're applying it. You really want to avoid dyed or synthetic mulches whenever possible. It's just all around better for your soil, better for the plant. If you live in areas that are in a fire hazard or a fire zone, you of course want to keep in mind the recommendations for your particular area. Make sure that you're not putting something that's really dry that could become just additional kindling. If you plant the lettuce closer together even than is suggested in the seed package, you may change the plant's ability to mature to a particular shape or size, but dense planting can reduce the need for mulch or other things. These are just things to consider when you're putting in that lettuce. And types of mulch to use: straw, bark, pine needles, paper, cardboard, lots of choices. I have to say that I'm partial to straw and cardboard. Those work real well for me. Okay, let's talk about fertilizing. So you want to make sure that your soil's healthy and there are enough nutrients in your soil to give that plant a really good start without burning it. So carefully fertilize when planting. You can fertilize approximately every 3 to 4 weeks. Plants in pots should be fertilized half as much and twice as often. So if your fertilizer suggests using a cup, you just use half a cup. If it suggests fertilizing every 3 weeks, you're fertilizing every 1.5 weeks. Part of that is because of the volume of soil that's in the container rather than what's going in the ground. Part of that is because of the draining of the container, draining everything through it. Now, compost is compost. It's a soil amendment. It is not usually a replacement for fertilizer. That's just a distinction to be aware of. And as always, when you're handling fertilizer, purchasing fertilizer, thinking about fertilizer, make sure not only to wear whatever safety equipment is suggested, but be really careful about the labels on the fertilizer. Is it an organic fertilizer? Is it OMRI certified? Is it conventional fertilizer that's more synthetic? They'll have very different nutrient levels. They'll have very different compositions. A lot of that information will be evident on the label when you're taking a look at that. as you know, the first thing that you see when you're looking at a fertilizer label is the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that's in it. That's the NPK. Those are those or macronutrients. All right. Any question about nutrients? I may have jumped the gun to go on to pests, but
No, I say, do you see one question? It says, where is a good place to shop for weed seed free garden straw? Weed seed free garden
okay.
straw.
That's a great question. And I don't know that I have the answer to that because to tell you the truth, we have a feed store not too far away from us. And I just go pick up my straw from there. And it's true, I get some weeds in the straw that I just pluck out really, really quickly. I haven't ever been one because my vegetable beds aren't that big. And I really only use the straw in my vegetable beds. I've got raised beds, they're 4 by 8. So they're not that big. I wish I had a really great resource for you, but I don't off the top of my head. Does anyone else?
Yeah, if anybody else wants to put anything in the chat, the only other thing I could suggest is maybe
thinking
letting
of-
it sit for a period of time so that the seeds would dry, but
Yeah, you could let it dry out. You could let it reach a certain temperature. You could add it to your compost and let it compost for a while, though then it's compost and not mulch. Maybe some of the big box stores like an Armstrong or a Lowe's would tend to have seeds or straw that's in packaging that says that it's weed free.
yeah, and that maybe you can always email the Master Gardener helpline that's on our website and we'll share at the end and we can do a little more research for you.
That's true. That's a great question. I hadn't thought about that one. Okay, we ready to go on to pest management?
I think so.
Okay. Look at those aphids. Oh my gosh. All right. So when you're managing pests in your garden, as always, you're going to have the vertebrate pests, squirrels, this little guy here, chipmunks, voles, all of those. Your invertebrate pests, those aphids and insects and other things, grasshoppers in my case, which love to eat some of my plants. Pathogens and diseases like root knot nematodes and like the psyllid that we had been talking about, powdery mildew, those kinds of things. There are ways to combat those pests. Vertebrate pests in your garden may be all about mechanical barriers, things like hardware cloth to keep those gophers out, or chicken wire, or agribond, or nursery cloth to keep birds and things from coming at your plants from the top. Higher walls, different kinds of fences. Those sorts of things can deter vertebrate pests in your garden. Now, somehow, I apologize. Perhaps I've gotten. Oh no, we're going to keep going. All right. So when you're thinking about barriers to your plants, you want to remember that your plants need 4 to 6 hours, 6 hours of sunlight to be able to do what they need to do, photosynthesize what they need to so that they can grow and mature and be delicious for you to eat. So whatever kind of a barrier you're using to keep those critters out that you don't want, maybe deer, maybe squirrel, maybe gophers, whatever it is, you have to make sure that you're not keeping out the sunlight that your plants need. So here are some examples of the kinds of things that you can do. So hoop houses work great of a variety of kinds. Clear plastic. Here's some looks like chicken wire. Here's another really good shot of that bed with the lid on it that's got the chicken wire. Here's one rather than hooped, that's flat. And it looks to me like in this case that the wire over the top is slightly flexible so that it's not flattening your plants. There are other ways that you can grow your greens. I like these veggie walls. There's edible walls are pretty neat. Now, some of these are hydroponic choices. There are a variety of ways to take care of that. For more information about any of these things, you can always look up details at the UCIPM website. Take a look at how to manage pests in the garden and landscapes, and just look up your plant for lettuce. And you will be given a list of the possible invertebrates and diseases that could pester your plant. Some of the common ones we're very familiar with: snail slugs, seen up there on the left at the top. The damage that aphids have caused is up there at the top on the right. Nematodes, which also are called roundworm. They're little microscopic worm-like creatures that live in the water, in the film, and the pore spaces in the soil. They are plant parasites, plant parasitics, and they feed on the roots. So the good is that there are always nematodes in the soil, and lots of them break down the elements in the soil to make more nutrients available for uptake through plant roots. That's the good. The bad is that there are these parasitic nematodes that attack our plants. One of the reasons that we practice crop rotation is to make sure that we're avoiding giving our crop specific nematodes the buffet that they want by growing lettuce in the same place all the time. Then there are these leaf miners here at the bottom. Now, this leaf miner for your lettuce is different than the leaf miner for your citrus. They both leave little roads in the tissue of the leaf, these little trails. But the citrus leaf miner is a moth, while the lettuce leaf miner is a fly. Okay. Now, there are treatments that you can use to get rid of the insects in your plants. But all of the effective ones also kill the beneficial bugs that are in your gardens that help to pollinate, that help to go after aphids, that do all these different things. So if you're going to make one of these choices, there are things to consider, like don't spray the insecticidal spray while your trees or other plants are in bloom, because you don't want to damage the bloom so that the beneficial insects in your garden don't have an opportunity to eat what they otherwise would have eaten. There's more specific information about this. Again, UCIPM, great resource for all kinds of tips about using insecticides in your garden. Any questions?
So far, nothing. And yeah, if you
Okay.
want to add your questions to the chat, otherwise, nope, not yet, but I'm learning lots. I always enjoy your presentations.
Oh, thank you. And I will have to admit, I'm not a sprayer. I very rarely even use neem oils, or I'm even reluctant to put garlic spray or pepper spray on my plants I'm very reluctant to spray things in the garden. So I would not be the expert. I have some very basic information about insecticides, fungicides, and other sides. But I will usually tell folks, just take a good look, read the labels, do your research, look things up at UCIPM, and think very carefully about exactly what it is that you're trying to do and exactly the kind of spray that you need. And is it going to do what you want it to do? Or is it going to do maybe what you think it might do and more? You really think about putting those sprays in your garden.
Yeah, especially
Go ahead.
Especially with lettuce, since you're eating the whole plant part, you've got to be so careful.
Right. I have a fairly high action threshold in my garden. I tend to let some little critters get in there and eat some of the plants because I really want birds in the yard. And I want beneficial predatory insects and invertebrates in the yard. And if I don't give them something to eat, they're not going to show up. So I'm not too hurt if I've got some critters nibbling on some of my plants, unless the infestation is so bad that they've eaten all of my lettuce. Then I get a little cranky because I really want some for me in my kitchen. Okay, some common diseases for these beautiful green leafy lettuces: dampening off, downy mildew, and powdery mildew. And this is a example of what these things look like. Now, most of these diseases can actually be combated even after they've already infected your plant by taking care of some really simple things. You can just remove the infected plant part. You can increase the sunlight to the plant so long as you don't create heat damage. You can maybe prune a few of the lettuce next to the plants to allow for increased air circulation. And all of these things will tend to relieve the stress that creates the downy mildew or the powdery mildew, which is actually it's a kind of a fungi that gets onto the tissues and spreads by wind-blown spores. So there are things to do. You could literally wipe it off. Usually just taking the green leaf off of the infected part of the plant can stop or slow the spread of the mildew. Environmental disorders, again, related to growing practices, which are cultural practices: bolting, there in the left, frost damage, or heat damage. So the message here is plants are going to be plants. You're growing virtually out in the wild with all of the different sorts of flies and wasps and worms and possible soil microbes and birds and butterflies and bees and all these amazing creatures that are out there in the outside world. There's going to be variation in heats. We know that well, or variation in temperature. There could be, for heaven's sakes, a little while ago, we had a surprise summer rainstorm that pretty much never happens here in Chino Hills, but it did. So the gardener's best line of defense is just walk your garden. Use your eyes and your experience and take a look at what's going on with your plants and see if you can understand what's happening in the garden, and then respond as appropriate. Okay, harvesting and seed saving. When you're harvesting your lettuce, pick the leaves that you need. It's a little bit like cut and come again with Brassicaceae. The plant will continue to grow. So you pick the leaves that you need and the plant will keep on doing its plant thing. Lettuce has a fairly short shelf life, so if you're only picking what you need, it's probably going to taste really great when you eat it. It's best if you pick it to be able to use it rather quickly. Leaving lettuce too long without taking any of the leaves off might result in bolting, so the plant's just going to go right to seed. That also generally happens when weather goes warm. I know that every year I fight this with my cilantro, which loves to bolt to seed. Really likes it. But lettuce is a super fun plant to seed save from, and you can see here in sort of the middle upper portion triangle. There's an image of the lettuce seeds. Okay, here's a list of all the resources that were used in the creation of this slide deck. And Maggie's going to drop a few of these in the chat.
There was a question asking for more information about dampening off. I did put a link in the chat about it, but I didn't know if you wanted to say anything else about dampening off. And then there was a question about bolting.
Oh, okay. Which one do you want to cover first? What was the
Uh,
question about bolting?
bolting was just let me see here. What drives bolting to occur?
Usually it's heat. Usually it's some sort of, it's like it's a light or temperature indication to the plant that something's going on and it may not be as healthy for as long as it wants. And so it bolts to seed to save itself. Now, I know I'm anthropomorphizing and giving the plant feelings. We all know that plants don't have a central nervous system and they don't really have feelings. And what the plant does is a chemical interaction between plant hormones and the environment outside of the plant. But basically, the plant panics and goes, "Oh, something's going to happen. I got to save myself and create seed." So that's what it does. And usually it's temperature. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'll let them chime in, and then yeah, dampening off, can be caused by a number of different things. And basically you want to try to create the right kind of conditions to where dampening off is less likely to occur. So I think the top couple of items, not items, but top couple of things is don't plant seeds or transplants into cold, wet soil, and reduce water logging. And they had a few other cultural practices listed. So that link I put in the chat had some pretty good information, but really it's like when you're growing your seeds and they just sort of die for what seems to be no reason when they're a few inches tall. That's
Now,
often
isn't
attributed to
dampening off,
dampening.
isn't it a fungal infection, just like powdery mildew is actually a fungus?
Well, I looked it up
Right?
because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. So it says that it's often one of several pathogens. So I think it's
Okay.
multiple things that create, and a lot of times the symptoms are a dieback kind of at the base of the stem on the roots, where it will just sort of flop over, and the leaves will look fine and the roots will initially look okay, and they'll just sort of flop over.
Right.
And it appears to be caused by a few different pathogens.
So I'm guessing then it could be bacterial or it could be fungal, which is the one that I knew about. So unless you're out there and you're become a soil doctor in your garden and you know all of the little microbials that are in the soil before you put the seed in, your best bet is just to go with general good rule of thumb practices, right? Make sure that your soil's amended well, make sure that it's not incredibly waterlogged, make sure that you're putting the right plant in the right place so that a plant that needs more sun isn't going into a really shady spot. Make sure that the container or the area where you're putting in your seed is going to be well drained so the seed's not sitting in a puddle. All of those kinds of things. Make sure that the area where the seed's going to be trying to germinate is getting the appropriate amount of sunlight that's required for that plant. Make sure that you've got some air circulation, and all these things prohibit too much fungal growth, too much humidity. They make your plants not become a seed milkshake. Right? That's
Well
about all I
said.
can think of. Can you think of anything
Yeah.
else, Maggie?
No, I think that sums it up. Let's see. I think I see there's something else in the chat. So let's see. There was a couple things. Dampening off seems to happen more often when plants are seated indoors and the soil is soggy and poorly draining. Yeah. So yeah, similar ED exactly. And then a question or a statement: arugula, recently planted and harvested young, but very hot, peppery as compared to the store-bought. Yeah, that's definitely. Do you have anything to chime in about lettuce flavors? I have a few comments about lettuce, homegrown lettuce flavor.
I think arugula tends to be peppery anyway. And if you're harvesting arugula at home, you're getting it fresh from the plant. So it hasn't had an opportunity to, I don't want to say desiccate, but dry out and lose some flavors as it's sitting waiting to be packaged and processed and cleaned and transported. So I'm not surprised that the plant that the leaf that you harvest at home is a stronger flavor than the one that you're getting from the store. Now, that being said, it could also be the particular variety of arugula you put in the ground.
Yeah, I think you're right, Donna. all those vegetables in the store have gone through a chilling process, a storage process, packaging. Definitely lost a lot of that initial flavor. So you may want to look for a little bit on arugula that sort of advertises itself to be a little bit more mild. Unfortunately, you can't like really water it more. You know, if you underwatered it, then maybe you could water it a little bit more. But all the things that Donna talked about throughout the presentation, you know, you definitely don't want it to be soggy. If you really underwatered it, it might be a little bit more intense flavor. But as long as it's getting proper water, sort of like a wrung out sponge, then maybe it's going for one that advertises itself as being a little bit more mild.
Right. And I think that's one of the really fun things about growing plants in your own garden, getting to know your own microclimates and your particular soil. It's a lot like growing grapes. The plant will take on the characteristics to some extent of the soil in which it's grown. And the combination of those chemicals and minerals and salts and water and sun will in some way affect the flavor profile. So something that you grow may taste slightly different than something that someone else grew or something that you're getting from the store, right? It's just inherent in the way that plants grow. You may
Yeah, and
find,
that's
you may find
yeah.
a vegetable that you never thought you were going to like, you love because you grew it at home.
Exactly. Yeah, and Edie chimed in with a similar comment, exactly. And it's just, you know, very particular. It's part of the adventure, right? And
Right.
exactly, there's things you don't like. I've had some really good vegetables like asparagus I'm not partial to, but I've had some really good homegrown asparagus. And then there's some things that I prefer the store variety. And the stores also have access to varieties that are made on a really large scale. They're often a little bit more, what I want to say, I don't want to say like generic, but they're vegetables or fruits that are streamlined for mass appeal. And so there's some things like bell peppers. I have a very hard time growing a bell pepper at home that I like. And if I am going to do a bell pepper, I'll often buy it from a farmer's market at the store because they can just do it better than what I seem to be able to do. But then there's things at home like the asparagus or things that I find I really like and play around with different varieties. And if you know, even if you don't purchase from them, places like larger or not larger, but seed companies, independent seed companies like, you know, the Plant Goods, is it Plant Goods Seed Company or Ojai Seed Company? There's Territorial Seeds. There is Baker Creek Seeds. There are many, many more seed companies that I'm not endorsing as a master gardener. They've got some great catalogs that really describe flavor profiles. Renee's Seeds, they really target their seeds. They have like, you know, cut flower gardens and also a lot of things that are intended to be taken directly into the kitchen, a lot of compact varieties for having them growing in containers near your kitchen. A lot of those have really great descriptions.
And there are the specialty seed growers like Katazawa from sort of central northern California. They have a great blog, and their descriptions are very specific.
Yeah, there you can get lost and freeze your credit card before you look.
Right. Oh, it occurs to me, I think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there are a couple of more slides just before we end, because I'm looking and it's 8 o'clock already. I want to make sure that I at least remind you, if you didn't know already, that the San Bernardino County Master Gardener's website is a great place for information. You can sign up for our newsletter and get information in your inbox every month, or follow us on social media. I just wanted to make sure that I said that before we got into too much of a discussion about flavor profiles, because we could talk about that for another hour at least.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think there's the Master Gardener helpline slide, and then that's it. And I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. But thanks so much. Great presentation.
Oh, thank you.